"It is only another empty castle," Mira said as she gazed across the desolation of the rubble, ruins, and weeds. "No," thought Bran, "it is the Nightfort, and this is the end of the world." Hey there, friends. David Lightbringer here, and George Martin sure does love a spooky story, doesn't he? Be it horror or dark fairy folklore, George loves to imbue his world with the heebie-jeebies, and that's nowhere more true than at the Nightfort. Westeros certainly does have its share of haunted castles, and with all due respect to Harrenhal, which is certainly haunted, there's no castle more haunted than the Nightfort. And in fairness to Harrenhal, it's only been around for about 300 years to harvest horror and misery from its unfortunate inhabitants, while the Nightfort has been around since the Long Night, or perhaps before, and yes, that's the sound of timeline heresy that you hear. This is the place where the rat cook cooked people into pies, where the thing that came in the night to collect some more apprentice boys for its ghostly procession, and where Night's king gave his seed and soul to Night's queen, and sacrificed to the others. This is the place where Simeon Star Eyes came to watch the Hellhounds fight, the place where Mad Axe stalked the yards and climbed the towers to butcher his brothers in the night, and the place where 79 oath-breaking Night's watchmen were entombed in the ice to stand eternal watch. Of course, the Nightfort is much more than the inspiration for most of Old Nan's horror stories, because as a haunted castle, it represents a crossing over point between the realms of the living and the realms of the dead. And indeed, not only does the talking underground weirwood face / Night's Watch passcode security door act as a portal between the realm of the living and the realm of the dead, and sometimes the living dead, the Nightfort itself appears to be one of the first places where the first men reached into the magical fairy realms and touched the levers of power and transformation which have shaped all of Westeros. It's a crossing point for Bran Stark, for Samwell Tarly, and for Gilly and her young son who was supposed to be given as a sacrifice to the others. And it may have been a crossing point for Night's King himself, who may have been using the Black Gate to give his own children to the others. Good Queen Alysanne Targaryen, Doomsday Prepper, shut this place down a little more than 200 years ago, and King Stannis, Human Shadow Factory, is planning on opening it up again. That means we're going to discuss the role of the Nightfort both in the original Long Night and the Long Night that's yet to come. If that sounds like a good video to you, then kindly manipulate your mouse cursor over that thumbs up button and give it a little click. And by the way, if you haven't read the books in a while, don't worry, we're going to go over all the little details of the Nightfort and the well and the weirwood face and all that. So let the haunting begin. So first of all, the most terrifying thing about the Nightfort may be those steps carved into the wall, directly into the ice of the wall. The ones which haven't been touched up in about 200 years and have now melted down into roundish nubs. The ones Mira somehow climbed 700 feet to the top of the wall and back down again. No freaking thank you. I'd rather face the thing that came in the night, frankly. And I'd definitely rather face Night's Queen. Ooh la la. But yes, the Nightfort is haunted, and it's where we go to meet the Fae, in all seriousness. Which, in A Song of Ice and Fire, of course, means the others. And check out The Others Were Green Men for more about the others as Icy Aishi. So in the last video, we talked about Bloodraven's Cave as the final destination for the first part of Bran's arc, which I guess you could call his becoming a Green Seer arc. And the Nightfort is basically the halfway point on that journey. It's essentially Bran's "you're not in Kansas anymore" moment. It's the moment when everything changes and you leave the world you know behind and enter a world of mystery. You're going down the rabbit hole, which in this case is an octagonal well inside of a kitchen where, again, the rat cook cooked people into pies. So this is the place where Old Nan's stories come to life, and it's pretty funny the way that George does it. Bran starts off by quickly reciting every single one of Old Nan's horror stories, and basically scaring himself half to death already. And then, of course, Sam Tarly and Gilly and the baby come rumbling and crying and stumbling out of the well, while Bran wonders if it's Mad Axe or the thing that came in the night or the Night King himself coming out of the well to kill him. But it's not, it's just Sam. But Sam is carrying an invitation from the Fae for Bran. And in this case, our Ice and Fire Fae would be Cold Hands, Bloodraven, and the Children of the Forest. So Old Nan's stories have come to life, and I'm actually going to do a follow-up video to this one where I'm going to go through all the Nightfort legends individually and attempt to decode them. But I'll just say a couple of things right now, such as one, it's kind of nuts how Old Nan packs Bran, an 8-year-old boy's head, full of the most horrific stories that you can find anywhere in Westeros. These sort of qualify as folk tales, but they're really just horror stories about murder and very awful things. But of course, many of the Nightfort legends do have fairy folklore themes. Several are about sacred customs and oaths and the curses that befall you when you break them, such as the Rat Cook, the 79 Sentinels, Mad Axe, and King Sherrit. And a couple of them use the very important fairy folklore theme of stealing or swapping children, which is often known as changeling folklore. And that would be the thing that came in the night, collecting the prentice boys, and of course Night's King and Night's Queen sacrificing to the others, meaning giving their children to be turned into others or absorbed into the other's hive mind, or whatever Craster is doing. We see these themes translated into the main story, where Gilly's baby, stolen from the others, if you will, rescued, we might say, is in effect traded at the Nightfort for Bran. Which makes you wonder, is Bran being given to the others? No, I don't think so. He's being given to the elves, the Children of the Forest, but obviously there is a connection, and as I've said in many videos, I do think Bran's destiny ultimately is to heal the weirwood net and whatever trauma it was that created the White Walkers. And so, children are being traded at the Nightfort, Gilly's baby and Bran, and it is Cold Hands who is operating as the collector here. Cold Hands himself, and we're going to do a Cold Hands video pretty soon, is almost directly based on a character from English folklore, a version of the Green Man called Herne the Hunter. Herne the Hunter is an undead version of a Green Man, complete with stag antlers on his head, and he's associated with a certain tree called Herne's Oak. Supposedly he was hanged on that tree for some sort of sin, and now he guards the woods and leads a version of the Wild Hunt, which is a kind of procession of the dead. So that sounds a lot like Cold Hands already, who's obviously dead and guarding the haunted forest, and acting like a green man by riding an elk and skin-changing ravens and such. And George actually includes a direct call-out to Herne the Hunter in the form of the two founding mythical heroes of House Tarly that are associated with Horn Hill, where House Tarly makes its home. So those two are direct children of Garth the Green, and they are named Herndon of the Horn and Harlan the Hunter. So instead of Herne the Hunter, it's Harlan the Hunter and Herndon of the Horn from Horn Hill, who both married a woods witch. The same woods witch. She kept them young and they slept with her when the moon was full. It's witchy stuff. But the point is, Sam Tarly, who descends from Harlan the Hunter and Herndon of the Horn, is the one that first meets Cold Hands, who is George's version of Herne the Hunter. So that's all very clever, and we'll follow up on that in the Cold Hands video. But the point for now is simply that Cold Hands is a psychopomp figure. He leads people around in the realm of the dead. And kind of like the thing that came in the night, he's collecting children and boys and bringing them places to caves, dark caves full of bones. It's all on the up and up. And what's really cool about this is that because Sam is from House Tarly, he has this Herne the Hunter symbolism that matches Cold Hands Herne the Hunter symbolism. So they're kind of twinsies right here, and they are both doing the same thing. Sam is also smuggling children through the wall, acting as a psychopomp, going between the realm of the living and the dead, and I just think that's pretty cool. And it emphasizes that the Nightfort is, again, where you go to meet the Fae and give them children or smuggle children or, fairy stuff. So let's talk about the Black Gate as a face portal to the Otherworld, where the others are from. And of course, the Otherworld is specifically the name of the fairy realm where the Aishi are from. It's where they live. So when we talk about places as characters, which is kind of what we've been doing in this series by asking, what role in the story does the House of the Undying or the House of Black and White play? The Nightfort really takes this to the extreme. It's kind of like a psychopomp turned into a castle, and it even has a face, which is a portal. And of course, we also see mouth portals at the House of Black and White and the House of the Undying. And I was trying to think of where George might have gotten inspiration for this. Of course, the magical doors is a big folklore fantasy trope. You might think of Durin's door to the Mines of Moria from Lord of the Rings, or the back panel of the wardrobe from the Chronicles of Narnia that leads to Narnia. But I was thinking of Alice in Wonderland, which has a lot of weird magic doors, and I finally remembered that it has a talking doorknob. So maybe that's where George got the idea of the Black Gate. But the point is, a face door is serving the role of the crossing point and the psychopomp at the same time. These sorts of talking doors are always testing you. The Alice in Wonderland doorknob is testing and quizzing Alice. Durin's door, you have to speak friend and enter in Elvish in order to get in. And of course, to get the Black Gate to open its mouth, you have to speak what appeared to be the original Night's Watch oaths. These sorts of magic doors pretty much always represent a journey away from and a departure from reality. In this case, we're going to the lands of always winter and the haunted forest. And you may remember that at the climax of Bran's coma dream vision from A Game of Thrones, he looked past the curtain of light and into the heart of winter and was afraid, but also knew why he must live. And ultimately, Bran is going to end up in Bloodraven's cave and inside the weirwood net. And the weirwood net itself is very much a death realm. That's why it's full of bones. That's kind of the point of that. And we see that vividly in the parallel of the House of Black and White, which is more literally a house of the dead and has all those parallels to Bloodraven's cave. And then finally, north of the wall is the realm of the dead, because that's where the whites are. It's where the Walking Dead are from. Now, in addition to being like Herne the Hunter, like a dead green man, Cold Hands is also a bit like Sharon, like the Greek ferryman across the river Styx. He is similarly a psychopomp figure, escorting your soul to the realm of the dead. And of course, the wall has the symbolism of a frozen river, which makes sense because the realm of the dead here is a frozen one, so we're crossing the frozen river. And then, of course, there is the underground river in Bloodraven's cave that may well go back to the Nightfort and to the bottom of the well at the Nightfort, where you'll recall there is water. Remember, Hodor dropped the stone, just like, was it Pippin or Merry? One of the damn hobbits, dropped the Mines of Moria. You guys have seen the movie. So yeah, there's both an underground river at the wall and the wall as a frozen river. And I guess you could say Sam and Cold Hands are both serving the ferryman role of escorting people back and forth. And by the way, this is one of the world's oldest myths, the idea of some sort of river that you have to cross in order to get to the realm of the dead. There's almost always a guard dog or hellhound. And of course, George has taken Greek Cerberus mythology and split it into the sigils of House Targaryen and House Stark, both of whom are heavily associated with underworld symbolism such as the crypts of Winterfell and Dragonstone and Valyria and all the places where the Dragon Lords hang out. Caves. Mostly caves. And although we don't find guard dogs per se at the Nightfort is the place where Simeon Star Eyes came to watch the Hellhounds fight. So that's actually a direct reference to Cerberus and thus the river Styx right here at the Nightfort. And then the final Nightfort symbol about crossing through a portal to the realm of the dead would be the idea of the wall as a frozen veil of tears. So the veil of tears, of course, is a kind of curtain between the realm of the living and the realm of the dead. There's a cool reference to it on Dragonstone when Davos is watching all the stone dragons of the castle through the flames of the divine bonfire sacrifice. And the wall is definitely a frozen curtain of tears. Remember, when it melts, it's said to weep. That means it's made of frozen tears, and it's obviously a curtain between the realms. On top of that, we go back to Bran's vision again and see that the Aurora Borealis is described as a curtain of light which sort of guards the heart of winter. So that's sort of mirroring the idea of the wall as a curtain that guards the entire north, and the wall itself is also described as alive with light, just like the curtain of light. Then there's a bunch of parallel symbolism over in the Vale, of course. We're talking about the frozen Vale of Tears. So in the frozen Vale of Arryn, we find a very cold and at times freezing waterfall called Alyssa's Tears. So again, it's the frozen Vale of Tears symbolism, and of course the Eyrie functions as a symbolic ice castle and almost a literal ice castle in the Sansa chapter, where she builds an ice castle. And inside of this symbolic ice castle, we find two weirwood thrones, which is some sort of clue that there are Green Seers in the heart of winter, or that the others are Green Seers. Check out The Others Were Green Men. But getting back to the Nightfort, you might recall that when Bran goes through the Black Gate, Hodor, like he always does, bumps Bran's head on the door lintel, and a drop of water falls on Bran's face, and it is salty as a tear. So again, I say the wall is like a frozen veil of tears, and this adds a mournful, tragic note to whatever Bran's destiny is. He's obviously going to confront the terror of the heart of winter, and it's probably going to be a sacrifice that's going to take even more than his legs, even more than what he's given already. There's a lot of Bloodraven is evil and he's going to steal Bran's body theories out there, but even without that, I think just the idea that the Children of the Forest and fate itself is going to require all this from Bran, and he's only 9 or 10, that's dark enough. So the Black Gate and perhaps the wall itself is weeping as it gobbles up yet another sacrifice. All right, this next section is called The Black Gate is Weird, because it is. It's weird. It's one of the weirder things in the story, as a matter of fact. And so at the Nightfort, there are 2 weirwood things. There's the talking weirwood door called the Black Gate, some 50 or 60 feet down in the side of the well. And then there's the young, faceless weirwood sort of poking up through the broken tiles of the kitchen floor next to the well. Most people think these are part of the same... I didn't run a poll, but a lot of people are saying that these are part of the same weirwood organism, especially since the sapling, if you will, seems to be kind of bursting up through the floor. Of course, at Bloodraven's cave, we saw that there is just way more of the weirwood organism underground than above ground. Bran and company are hundreds of feet below, and the roots are getting thicker and more plentiful. Check out the Bloodraven's cave video, which means that the weirwood structurally is more like a fungal body, where it's just sprouting caps. The trees are like the caps, and most of it is underground. So if that's the case at the Nightfort, that means the Black Gate and the sapling are probably connected. They're probably part of the same thing. And I'll just put this Black Gate quote up on the screen here so we can see all the detail. It is directly in the side of the well, and they are far enough down the well where when they look up back at the top, it is about the size of the moon. So I estimate that 50, 80 feet, something like that. The Black Gate has a faint glow, like milk and moonlight, but its eyes look blind. And notably, its face is not bleeding. It's not described as carved, and there's no blood. And then even more notably, it talks. It's the only weirwood face we've ever seen that moves or talks. And all the other weird faces we've seen, of course, are carved and do ooze blood sap. The other possible exception here would be the weirwood trees on the Isle of Faces, which according to this Justin Sweet calendar art, which is directed by George and usually regarded as canon, the weirwood trees on the Isle of Faces have green hand leaves instead of red hand leaves, like Garth Greenhand, and they appear to have faces which are not bleeding, which could imply that they can talk, like the Nightfort face. Check out my Green Weirwoods video for more about the Isle of Faces weirwoods, but yeah, they might be similar to the Black Gate weirwoods, simply because they don't seem to be carved and do not bleed. The Isle of Faces is linked to the Green Men, again, Garth being basically a green man, and of course at the Nightfort, we find Cold Hands on the other side of the Black Gate, who is kind of playing the role of a dead green man. So all of this is seemingly hinting at some older, original form of weirwood tree that can talk and take your oath and maybe give you instructions. But we really can only speculate about how this works. For example, when we look at the Nightfort face, does this mean that weirwood trees can just sprout faces anywhere on their trunk above ground, or anywhere on their organism bodies below ground? Or is the Black Gate face some sort of green seer or green man who specifically gave his life and was transformed into this door? Or you might say he merged with the weirwood organism to create the door. As I discussed in my Naga's Bones video and many other places, the description of the Grey King, there's a lot of Grey King videos in my library, the description of the Grey King, as you can see on the screen here, almost perfectly matches Bran's description of the Black Gate weirwood face door. And the Grey King appears to be a green seer who is kind of petrifying in his weirwood throne. So it could be that the Black Gate door used to be somebody, if you will. All right, so we're told in multiple places that the Nightfort is the oldest castle on the wall. That implies that the construction of the Nightfort is probably tied into things like the building of the wall itself, which means Brandon the Builder and the formation of the Night's Watch and the Long Night, or at least the immediate aftermath of the Long Night. But I, timeline heresy captain that I am, happen to think that it's pretty easy to determine that the Nightfort is actually older than the wall. It's not the oldest castle on the wall. It actually predates the wall. So first of all, when you sit down to do the grand project of building the wall, which supposedly involved Bran the Builder and giants and children of the forest, you would need a base of operations. It's very cold up here, so you need some sort of a fort. You might actually build the fort first before you build the wall, or maybe as you are building the beginnings of the wall. You need a place to make a fire and for everyone to sleep. You just do. And since the Nightfort is said to be the oldest castle on the wall, that makes it the most likely candidate for a castle that would have been built, again, either before or as the wall was being built. Now, one of the most interesting things about the famous deleted Feast for Crows draft from the Cushing Library is that Melisandre calls the Nightfort the heart of your wall. And what's unique about the Nightfort? The giant weirwood organism with the talking face and stuff, right? So it seems likely that the Nightfort, like almost all early First Men castles, was built around the weirwood organism. Because so far as we know, humans don't know how to plant weirwoods and can't really do that. So if they built a castle here, they built it around the weirwood organism. The weirwoods live forever, and this thing is pretty big. Obviously, it goes way down there, and that means that the location of the weirwood organism dictated the location of the Nightfort, and that in turn dictated the location of the wall. And it does seem very likely that there may be other weirwoods under the wall. Whether they have talking faces or not, we do not know. But yeah, that's the most logical order for things to have gone. The weirwood organism is there first, people discover it, they build a castle around it. So when Melisandre says, "Great was the lore that raised your wall," and that the Nightfort is the heart of the wall, yeah, it does make you think like maybe the weirwood magic of this Nightfort organism is what Bran the Builder, or whoever was remembered as Bran the Builder, used to raise the wall, or perhaps to set the wards and spells into the wall that actually keep the others out. It's not the ice, it's the magic wards. So, and just a moment ago when I was talking about the idea of a whole line of potential weirwood trees or weirwood organisms beneath the wall, some of you guys might be thinking of the idea of ley lines, and George, as an old hippie, of course, would be familiar with that. And he has Melisandre refer to the wall as a hinge of the world, which seems to be George's idea of a ley line. It's a power spot, some sort of place where the energy from the other realm is stronger. We don't know if that existed first and that's why the wall was built here. That's kind of what I'm saying, I guess, with all the weirwood stuff. But it's also possible that creating a big magical thing like the wall amplifies the power further and makes it an even stronger hinge of the world. So yeah, that's what Bran the Builder may have been cooking with. Pretty powerful stuff, sounds like. And as for the well itself at the Nightfort, it seems likely that it was built to access the weirwood face gate, and perhaps the water down below, or maybe there's more weirwood face gates if you just keep going. Probably not, it's probably just that one, and maybe the water. So another interesting fact about the Nightfort is that it is the largest castle on the wall, so not only the oldest, but also the largest. Its dungeons can actually hold 500 people. So we have to wonder, was this originally just the castle of some first man king? You know, like all the other great castles in Westeros. The oldest king we have associated with the Nightfort is of course Night's King, who is said to be a Stark and the brother of Brandon the Breaker Stark, who was the king of winter at that time. But it's possible that the idea that Night's King was a Stark may go back to the builder of this original First Man castle, theoretically. Perhaps the builder of the Nightfort was a bastard brother to the Lord of Winterfell, and that's why the Night's King legend has him as a brother to the Stark of Winterfell. So maybe the Nightfort is one of those things where, you know, the bastard brother goes off and builds his own castle because he can't have the inheritance of the firstborn brother. And this would even mirror the Jon and Robb rivalry, pretend sort of rivalry, as Jon, the bastard brother, goes to the wall while Robb inherits Winterfell. And Mel refers to that as Jon standing in Robb's shadow. So as I'll try to explain in the next video about decoding the legends of the Nightfort, there are many reasons to think that parts of the legend about Night's King and Queen do in fact predate the Wall and the Night's Watch, and actually speak about the original creation of the others. That would make Night's King the King of the Long Night, which seems pretty intuitive, and that would make Brandon the Breaker Stark the last hero, so he broke the long night, or you might say he ushered in the break of dawn. Now, I do think that other Lord Commanders, later Lord Commanders, presumably the 13th, were also found to be smuggling babies to the others through the Black Gate, as we'll talk about in the next section, and that this led to a conflation of myths. But the point is, I do see a scenario where all of this starts with one person, Night's King, finding Night's Queen and creating the others and kicking off the long night. And since he supposedly took Night's Queen back to the Nightfort and made her his queen, and since there are all these clues about the Nightfort being built before the wall, you kind of see how all this could come together in a scenario where the entire long night starts with Night's King, probably a Stark, meeting the Fae, Night's Queen, and creating the others at the Nightfort. Alright, Snowgate. This is kind of a fun one. So, a lot of people think this is an old fandom theory, that the first long night ended with a pact. A baby swapping pact, or you might say a pact to foster children with our former enemies. That's how a lot of wars in the story are ended. With some sort of peace treaty and with kids being swapped, fostering hostages. The line is blurry, so something like that. But with the others. The others do clearly need babies to sustain themselves in some way. Some people think those babies go to White Walker daycare and grow up to be others, but I think the others are hive mind, which means they're probably just absorbing the life force of the babies to strengthen the hive mind and further substantiate their existence. We don't know how many physical others there are, or if that's even a thing. Again, if they're a hive mind, they might be able to make as many as they want. But clearly, however it works, they do want Craster's sons. And we also know that the men of the frozen shore worship cold gods of snow and ice, which probably means the others, which probably means they're doing what Craster does. Because the key thing to notice here is that Craster is not bothered by the whites or the others like all the other wildlings in the north, except for the frozen shore people, perhaps, in exchange for his offerings, his sacrifices. So that indicates that there is some sort of a pact or agreement that is possible to be worked out with the White Walkers. I mean, Craster is doing it. So the question then becomes, is that what the last hero did to end the original long night? And did subsequent Night's Watchmen then have to smuggle babies through the Black Gate? So there are some wordplay clues here. Bastard babies, the unwanted bastards who are sometimes thrown down wells, if you will, like the well at the Nightfort, are called snows. So, is the Black Gate a snow gate? Is it a gate where we pass the baby snows through? Well, a different Night's Watch fort right nearby is called Snowgate. And Snowgate was renamed Queen's Gate, as in Night's Queen, perhaps. And actually, Queen's Gate was renamed after Queen Alysanne, who shut down the Nightfort. So all of this does tie back to the Nightfort. And once the Lord Commanders of Nightfort and Snowgate fought a little war against each other. And perhaps those are all clues that the Black Gate was a Snowgate for Night's Queen. And then rewinding just a couple of seconds, Queen Alysanne shut down the Nightfort. And of course, Queen Alysanne is almost certainly in possession of Aegon's prophecy about this great threat from the north. So, did Queen Alysanne go to the Nightfort and read the old scrolls, or maybe have a dragon dream, and somehow intuit or learn that the Nightfort has been used to strengthen the others, to give them babies? And is that why she shut it down? She sold all her jewelry that she had on her to pay for a new castle, so she could talk the Night's Watch into shutting down the Nightfort. And then her and King Jaehaerys also did a bunch to strengthen the Watch. Check out my Queen Alysanne Doomsday Prepper video. But yeah, maybe that's why she did it, because of the Snowgate. So then, as we mentioned, Bran is a child passed through the Black Gate that's given to the north. And Jon Snow is also a baby Snow who will I really think he's going to get claimed by the others. Check out my videos about Lord Snow, the others stealing Jon's body. Really think it's going to happen, at least for a time. And then, of course, the others are wanting to come and collect Gilly's monster, who was, taken from them. So all those could be echoes of baby Snows being passed to the north through the Nightfort. And of course, children also go the other way. Again, Gilly's monster, is smuggled away, or you might even say traded for Bran. And I do think this happened in the ancient past, that last hero may have rescued a child of Night's King and Queen, or some child meant to be given to the others, just like Sam did. And this is a whole theory, actually. It's called Blood of the Other theory. So, like the Targaryens have the blood of the dragon, if there was a half other-blooded child, like a child of Night's Queen, who was rescued and taken back to become a Stark and then contributed to the Stark bloodline, that means the Starks have the blood of the others. There's also a deeper pattern that we don't have time to get into of people that parallel Night's Queen having their children collected by a Stark. And this pattern may have started with this ancient pact with the others that almost certainly would have started at the Nightfort. And some people even think that the last hero is the Night's King, and that him sacrificing to the others with Night's Queen is the heroic act that ended the long night. So Put that in your pipe and smoke it. And praise Garth. And check out our Praise Garth t-shirts at our bonfire store at the link below. Sworn to the Green Seers, which means it's time to talk about the Night's Watch, who are sworn to the Green Seers. If the Nightfort predates the Wall and the Long Night, as I suspect it does, then it might have been the place where they organized to fight the War for the Dawn. Or if it was built while the wall was being built or shortly after, then it would have been the place where the first post-Long Night Night's Watch organized. So either way, it's where the watch started, and it makes sense that it would be here at a weirwood-centered castle, because everything about the Night's Watch is centered around the weirwood. So for example, before the Andals came to Westeros, all the original Night's Watchmen would have sworn their oaths to the weirwoods, just like Jon and Sam do. I'm assuming those Deep One worshipping Ironborn from the Dawn Age aren't here volunteering for the watch. So apart from that potential exception, all the first Night's Watchmen are swearing their oaths to defend the realms of men and not leave their post, etc., to the Green Seers that are behind the weirwood faces. And then here at the Nightfort, we of course have a big weirwood face that accepts the Night's Watch oaths like a passcode, which really just drives home the idea that yes, the Watchmen swear their oaths to the Green Seers. And this is, of course, a shortened version of the oath, which most people assume to be the original oath. And yeah, that makes sense. This is the first castle on the wall, like we've been saying. Now, it makes a ton of sense that the first Night's Watchmen would swear their oaths to the Green Seers, because all the tales agree that the turning point of the last hero's story is when he sought and found the aid of the Children of the Forest. This is what enabled him to rally the first men of the Night's Watch and win the War for the Dawn. He went from having a broken sword and a bunch of dead friends, even a dead dog and horse, to having a sword of dragon steel and those first hardy Night's Watchmen, who might have just been his dead friends resurrected like cold hands, but that's a theory for another day. Then, carrying forward this partnership between the Watch and the Children, we have the fact that the Children used to, for many years before they were thinner in number, I guess, provide the Night's Watch with dragon glass, which is of course very effective at popping the others. And then even to this day, we have Cold Hands, a dead Night's Watchman, and Bloodraven, a former Night's Watchman who still serves as an extension of the Watch, working with the Children of the Forest. So, teamwork. Alright, so the Nightfort is a place where a bunch of first men swore sacred oaths to the Green Seers, and this teamwork seems to have arisen out of the cooperation needed to overcome the Long Night. This actually sounds an awful lot like the Pact, as in the pact that went down on the Isle of Faces between the first men and the Green Seers of the Children of the Forest. A sacred order was formed there to watch over the weirwoods. And then at the Nightfort, a sacred order, a watch, was organized by the Green Seers to watch over this unique weirwood, in part. And like the first men on the Isle of Faces, they swore sacred oaths to these Green Seers. As we discussed, the Isle of Faces has those weirwood trees that have green leaves and perhaps non-carved talking weir faces, which would of course compare to the talking weir face that doesn't bleed and isn't carved at the Nightfort. The sacred order that watches over the weirwoods on the Isle of Faces is of course made up of the Green Men, and at the Nightfort, on the other side of the weir face, we find Cold Hands, who is like a dead Green Man. Two of the recent Lord Commanders, Jon Snow and Bloodraven, were skin changers and thus using Green Seer magic. Part of my green zombie about the last hero's original dozen having been resurrected to become the first Night's Watchmen would be that they were all skin changers and Green Seers, and thus were capable of a better resurrection. I think Cold Hands is a skin changer, was and is, and that's why he is a special kind of zombie. And of course, Jon Snow is a skin changer who's going to become, resurrected in some sense. And I believe it's the fact that Jon is a skin changer and can store his soul in Ghost that will enable him to become a better zombie than, say, Beric or Lady Stoneheart. And so, my theory about this formation of the original Night's Watch at the Nightfort is that it is either the same thing remembered in legend as the pact between the first men and the Green Seers, or similarly that it is a part of that same pact of agreement between the first men and the children. That's probably a better way to say it. They're forming green watches, in various important places. Or if my timeline heresy is wrong and the pact isn't at the time of the Long Night, I think that's the reason why the first men switched religions, basically, because the children helped them survive the Long Night. But if I'm wrong about that and the pact was long before the Long Night, then this formation of the Night's Watch of the Nightfort would just be an echo of that original formation of the Sacred Order of the Green Men. All right, Nightfort Predictions A, if you will, Hodor and Walder. So in the Bloodraven's Cave video, I talked about the theory that the door that Hodor will hold, Hodor, will be none other than the Black Gate at the Nightfort. Hodor's original name, you see, is Walder, and that sounds like wall door, and the Black Gate is the door in the wall. Meanwhile, Walder Frey, who shares the Walder name with Hodor, he's the Lord of the Crossing, down at a river crossing. So Walder Frey's got his own River Styx, Lord of the Crossing psychopomp symbolism going on, and Walder Hodor may become the Lord of the Crossing in that he's going to hold the Black Gate and maybe get swallowed by it. But I said all that already in the last video and in other videos, so let me give you something new. Hodor, as many of you will know, is named after a Norse god, Hathor. And Hathor is the Norse warrior god of snow and death and winter. And the Norse root word behind his name, Hod, means war, slaughter. So he represents fearsome winter warriors and the merciless slaughter of winter itself. Accordingly, Hodor cosplays as a king of winter. He stole a king of winter sword from the crypts, and then he eventually gains ice eyes and a snow beard when his tears freeze over and his snot actually and other moisture freezes his beard. And then down in the crypts of Winterfell, we have kings of winter named Brandon Ice Eyes and Edric Snowbeard. So Hodor is a full-on warrior king of winter, like his namesake, and interestingly, Hodor, in many mythologies, struggles or fights with his brother Balder, and they're fighting over the love of the goddess named Nanna. So Hodor's a descendant of Old Nan, and in the Norse myth, Hodor is tied to Nanna. So very cool, and it's actually much worse because, of course, Hodor's real name is Walder, and Hodor's brother is Balder. So Walder and Balder, Hodor and Hathor. Now, the most famous myth about Hathor and Balder is the one where Loki tricks Hathor into accidentally killing Balder with a spear of mistletoe. And the reason he can trick Hathor into doing this is because Hathor is blind, just like the Black Gate, specifically described as blind. So if Hodor is swallowed or merges with the Black Gate, then he'll just be like his namesake blind god Hathor. Now, in some versions of the myth, Hathor, who didn't mean to slay his brother Balder, goes to the underworld to try to resurrect him. And we see echoes of that in the story. So first, Hodor himself is wandering the caves at Bloodraven's Cave, while Bran cannot, so he's obviously tagging along. And Bran is playing the role of Balder, by the way. Bran is a summer king. Balder represents summer and light and beauty. He's called the beautiful god. And so yeah, Bran's disappearance to Bloodraven's Cave is much like Balder's death. But then it's actually going to be Hodor's sacrifice via the Hodoring that allows Bran to return to the world. So it'll be Hodor who's trapped in the underworld to save Bran. But yeah. And then another cool detail that I found today is that Balder actually has a great ship. It's the greatest of all Viking ships. So maybe that's another clue that Balder Bran is going to escape from Bloodraven's Cave on a boat. And this would, of course, be something more like a reed boat made out of weirwood scraps and whatever else Mira can find in the Weir Cave. And Balder's ship is so great that they can't even push it out off the runners for the Viking funeral. So they have to recruit a giantess to come push it out. And when she pushes it so fast that it catches fire instantly. So perhaps that'll be Hodor pushing the boat or Mira pushing it, I don't know. But be careful, guys. Don't catch it on fire. You've only got the one boat. And then finally, to wrap up the symbolism, it would make sense if Hodor is holding the door at the Black Gate when it closes. I mean, it would have to close. That would be the whole point, is that he's holding the Whites back while it closes with Bran on the other side, which would mean from Bran's perspective, Hodor's getting eaten by the Black Gate, and that would make a lot of sense since Hodor's mind is essentially being scrambled by the weirwood net. Nightfort Predictions Round 2, or Part B. I forget what I said the first time, but the other big question about the Nightfort, what are these plans that Stannis and Melisandre have for the Nightfort? It might be more important what Melisandre, since Stannis is not really making the plans. But yeah, is it that the Nightfort is the center of this hinge of the world magic that Melisandre seems to covet using for some great spell. If the Nightfort is the center of the wall, then would kind of make sense that it's got the strongest magic. So maybe she wants to do something important to protect the realms of men against the others. Obviously, that is her motivation. Or perhaps she just thinks it's vulnerable and needs to be guarded. What's interesting is that Alysanne didn't. Alysanne was presumably worried about the others, but she shut it down and got everyone away from there. So it seemed more like she was worried about it being used to feed the others' children, as opposed to it being a weak spot that needed to be guarded. But Mel does see the future, so perhaps she's had a vision, or just has a hunch, that the others are going to invade there and that it's important to be there. Or it could even be something slightly more counterintuitive. Maybe the wall needs to come down at the appointed time, and maybe Melisandre is coming to the Nightfort to do that. Maybe she's going to undo the magic, the great lore that raised the wall. Maybe that's a part of what has to happen in order to defeat the others. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. The symbolism of the wall, thematically, it kind of does need to come down. So maybe Melisandre's thinking outside the box. Maybe it's a shadow baby thing. The others are shadows. They were made there. So maybe she wants to make a powerful new kind of shadow there. And then the last question is, will Melisandre perhaps be at the Nightfort if and when Bran gets back there? Obviously, Bran's going to come back somehow, but it's my theory he's going to pop up at the Nightfort. So if that works out and he pops up there, will Melisandre be there with a welcoming party? Remember, when she saw Bran and Bloodraven in the dream, she actually wondered, is this the enemy? And then she's like, nah, it couldn't be him. But she doesn't necessarily trust Bran and Bloodraven. So that could be a very interesting meeting, little theology discussion. And certainly these will be two people with a lot of information about the end times. And theoretically, they should have the same goals in the end and can work together. But I don't know. You tell me in the comments what you think would happen if Melisandre and Bran meet at the Nightfort. And also let me know what you think Melisandre wants with the Nightfort. And also what your opinion is on all the other stuff I said about the Nightfort. So this has been a really fun video to make. I do love the Nightfort, obviously. I actually had these two commissioned, these two artworks by Atlantis Morissette and Theo S of the Black Gate. So yeah, thanks for watching. Thanks all of you who've joined the Patreon and the YouTube channel member Squisher via the join button below. And I'll see you next time with another video about another weird place full of magic.